When I think of AyaNeo, I think of devices that are ultra powerful and ultra expensive. But this little PC right here is neither of those things. This is the AyaNeo Retro PC AM01, specifically the version that ships with an AMD Ryzen 3200U chip. And while this modest little PC isn't going to blow you away in terms of performance, it has plenty of character, a unique design, and is priced competitively too. Let's go ahead and do a quick unboxing, and then we'll take a look at the device and its specs. Inside the box you're going to get a multitude of other boxes. Inside the first flat pack there's an instruction manual for the AyaNeo Space 2.0 app, a user guide for the PC itself which includes disassembly and hard drive upgrade instructions, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and a series of stickers which you can use to customize your device. I really like how these have a real retro styling with this kind of rainbow theme. It's undeniable that the AM01 has a really nice retro aesthetic. On the top of the PC, you'll find this black bar, which is supposed to represent the Apple Mac's original screen, although it is just purely decorative on this model. Then you'll find this classic looking power switch, and the AyaNeo branding as well. On the front there's a USB-C port and a 3.5mm headphone jack. And around the back you'll find your various I/O, including a barrel jack for power, full-size HDMI and display port, 3 USB 3 ports and 1 USB 2 port, and an Ethernet port too. I really like the look of this PC overall. I think it's styled really nicely. Although I do think that right off the bat I noticed something kind of weird about this PC. And that's that all of the design styling is on the top, and you're going to be laying this thing down flat. And if you're anything like me and you're just going to stuff this PC behind a monitor or something, you're really going to lose that retro aesthetic. I just kind of wish I could stand it up instead of laying it down. But if you do stand it up, you lose the 2 ports on the front and all your cables splay out the top. But anyway, regardless of that, the PC does look great. The only thing that I can see missing right off the bat is a SD card reader. I just wish that these mini PCs would come with them. It seems kind of essential to me. But that might be because I use the SD card reader often. So anyway, let's go through the specifications of this device. The AM01 is available in 2 models, one with a Ryzen 5700U and this one with the Ryzen 3200U. This model I have here comes with 16 gigs of RAM and a 512GB storage drive. All of the other specs are more or less the same as the higher end model except for specifically the Wi-Fi card. The Wi-Fi card on this model has Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 4.2, whereas the higher end model has Wi-Fi 6. The device draws up to 35 watts of power, although you may be able to actually increase that to 54 watts if you bring your own power supply. And to be honest, all the other specs are on the spec sheet, which I'll just pop up on screen now. The only real other thing to note here is that you can add an additional drive, and we're going to look at that a little bit later on. Jumping into the first boot here, things were a little clunky. Now I have to say, I do acknowledge that I have a heavy bias against Windows. However, I do think it's true that it is getting worse and worse on lower end hardware as time goes on. Because simply trying to set up and log in to this device took absolutely forever with the Windows setup wizard. And honestly, I got a little bit frustrated by it. But after I was all set up, the AyaNeo Space app launched. And the AyaNeo Space is kind of strange because it's a really cool piece of software. It just hasn't been designed for this type of PC. And that thought applies to all sorts of things like TDP control, which is kind of useless on a mini PC, and all the way to certain gamepad focused functions which just doesn't exist because this isn't a handheld. But that's okay. The worst problem with the AyaNeo Space app on this PC specifically is that it just chugs. It's just way too slow to be usable. I think that AyaNeo are so used to making these ultra high-end, high-power systems that maybe this software just isn't ready for a lower powered system. Of course this will hopefully be updated in future, but out of the box this is kind of unusable to be honest. It just lags way too much. Closing out of that app and getting onto the Windows desktop, we have a fairly nice theme for Windows 11 here, with a kind of beige coloring, and a custom wallpaper too. And Windows 11 is Windows 11, so if you like it, if you don't, you're like me. And for the most part, this PC does work well for basic use like web browsing. However, you're not going to be able to do anything more than that, for example graphic editing, 3D modeling, or video editing. You're just not going to have a good time. The 3200U is just not a chip that's designed for that type of use. And I will say that despite the Windows bias I described earlier, this PC does run very slowly on Windows. But I wanted to jump into some games, bearing in mind that this is not a gaming PC. It might look really retro, but it is not a gaming PC, and AyaNeo have made that very clear. But this is a retro gaming channel, so we'll take a look. And actually, I was pretty impressed overall with the gaming performance out of the box. For a PC that I wasn't expecting to work in literally any capacity at all for gaming, it's actually not too bad. I first jumped into one of my favorite racing games, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, and that ran pretty much great out of the box. I swear I can remember changing graphics settings in this game, but I couldn't find it for the life of me. But anyway, it ran pretty well and was great fun. Then I booted up into Skyrim. This isn't remastered or the new edition or anything, it's just stock Skyrim. And changing all the graphics settings down to the lowest at 720p and no anti-aliasing, and I would say it was not a complete disaster. It definitely runs slower when you get into town, but in the open areas it wasn't too bad. And then I booted up Doom. Again, on lowest settings and at 720p, it does seem somewhat playable. However, something that was absolutely noticeable this entire time was the very, very long loading time. Just for kicks, I installed Armored Core 6. And after choosing a mission and entering it, it took a whopping 12 minutes to get into the mission. Now this PC is not going to be able to play Armored Core 6 at all, but I still find that loading time to be kind of insane. Again, this is not a gaming PC, and so AAA games are not going to work on it. But there are definitely some games that do run really well. For example, Sonic Superstars, which just released a month or two ago, ran perfect. I had to lower the settings to the minimum and set it to 720p, but that doesn't really matter in a cartoony game like this. It runs great and it still looks great too. Emulation performance was a little more sluggish than I expected it to be. PSP ran well in general, but God of War absolutely chugged whenever it was upscaled anywhere past 2x. Wipeout also ran really slowly. This was kind of surprising to me because I do think this PC has the chops to run PSP well. With GameCube, things were also a little sluggish, but usually kind of okay at native resolution. Wii was just about out of reach. And so was PS2, it just ran kinda slowly in general, even at native resolution. So overall, at this point, again acknowledging that this is not a gaming PC, I think the performance is actually pretty okay. And bear in mind that this is a $150 or maybe $200 PC. The main problem I think here is that Windows itself is incredibly bloated and runs incredibly slowly on low-end hardware like this. And so the obvious answer to that is to use a better, more efficient operating system, which is of course what I did. Here I have a lean Arch Linux installation, and I even decided to customize this with a retro theme which I thought looked really nice. On Arch Linux, this PC boots substantially faster, everything loads much faster, and it's generally much snappier in general use. You also have much more RAM generally available than you would on Windows, which means that multitasking should be a little bit better too. But I really wanted to test my theory on whether there was more performance for gaming on the table with a better operating system. And I'm happy to say that I was correct. And of course, this being a lower end PC, I wanted to try out some lower end games. And I started with Assassin's Creed. I'm so happy that this game is still available on GOG, with no DRM and no signing in nonsense with Ubisoft. And it ran really well on this PC. This is low settings, but it is running at 1080p. And even in a busy scene like this with a big crowd of people, it ran really great. I then jumped into some WRC7 on Steam. And with this game at low settings at 720p, again it still looks pretty good, at least better than the Switch versions of this series. And it's perfectly playable as well, the performance seems really great. Another slightly older game is Transformers Devastation, and you can't buy this anymore, so I'm so thankful I have it in my Steam library. Really, the fact that they made a G1 themed cel-shaded Transformers hack and slash by Platinum Games and then removed it from the store is kind of a crime. But this game again runs great, 720p, low settings, but looks perfect. But really, where this PC excels is playing in early Xbox 360 era games or lower. For example, one of my favorite games from that era, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. Now you don't need to be a Star Wars fan to enjoy this game, and I'm living proof of that. But this game runs at 1080p with the graphic settings set to high detail, and it works pretty much flawlessly. Maybe a judder here or there, but barely noticeable. And so I think that with this PC, you need to keep your expectations in check with PC gaming. Again, I really want to acknowledge this isn't supposed to be a gaming PC in the first place, but it does work well for retro PC gaming. However, the performance gains when switching to Arch Linux were mostly noticeable in emulation. For the most obvious example in the world is God of War on PSP. On Linux, with this game upscaled to 1080p, I got an absolutely rock solid 60 frames a second without a single drop at anywhere during the first level. This is a monumental improvement over when I was trying it on Windows earlier. And the higher end stuff like GameCube and Wii ran a little bit better too. For example, in New Super Mario Bros. Wii, I was able to upscale to 1080p and get a mostly 60 frames per second experience. It wasn't quite 60, so if I lowered it down to 720, it ran perfectly. And it's a similar story with Tatsunoko vs Capcom. On Windows, I had to run this at native resolution to get anywhere remotely close to full speed. But on Linux, I could easily upscale it to 720p for full speed, or 1080p if I was willing to accept a few stutters and slowdowns here or there. Super Smash Bros. Brawl also ran basically flawlessly at 60 frames a second at 1080p. And when I played Ace Combat on PS2, on the Linux side, I was able to play at native resolution without any frame drops at all, whereas it basically didn't play at all on the Windows side. Virtua Fighter Evolution ran at 1080p with no problems on Linux, but it did have quite a lot of slowdown on Windows, and couldn't maintain full speed. Now, this isn't a Windows versus Linux video, but what I'm showing you is that on a low-powered PC like this, you have a lot more power available to you if you just switch to a better operating system. And in fact, I think that the AM01 is a really great PC for tinkering around with Linux if you never have before. Or if you wanted to turn this into a retro gaming PC specifically, you could install something like Batacera, and then you'll get all the benefits of a lean Linux operating system with an easy-to-use gaming-focused interface. So moving on from gaming and performance, I want to talk a little bit about one thing I really don't like about the AM01. And that is how difficult it is to upgrade this PC with more RAM, a different solid-state drive, or to add your own 3.5mm drive. Now, I've tested quite a few mini PCs, and one of the recurring features of them is ease of upgrade. So for example, with the old AMR5 I got from Ace Magician, you could easily pull off the panel on the side and get instant access to the storage and RAM slots. But on the AM01, there is a lot of work involved. This is all documented in the manual, but at least in the manual that I got, the instructions are actually incorrect, or rather incomplete. So the first thing to do is to remove the screws from the bottom and pry off the bottom panel. Fine. And then, according to the manual, you'll remove 3 screws and a couple of cables, after which the motherboard should just lift out. Except it doesn't. And I couldn't figure this out for ages, until I actually removed the heatsink. And then I realized that there's actually a 4th screw that's not documented that you need to remove to take the motherboard out. And the problem here is that by having to remove the heatsink itself, you then need a bunch more stuff to do this, for example, isopropyl alcohol or PCB cleaner, and thermal paste. And there are a lot of screws here already. We have 4 for the heatsink and 4 for the motherboard. Anyway, once this is all out, you gotta screw your solid state drive or hard drive into this chassis. You gotta connect the cable to the drive itself and then plug it into the underside of the board, before reassembling the whole thing, reapplying your thermal paste and whatnot. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't the end of the world. And in fact, on a PC like this, I doubt you're going to want to upgrade the hard drive anyway. But if you do want to, it's just a lot harder than I've experienced in previous mini PCs. And I also can't help but think that there was a huge opportunity here to have the RAM slots or the drives underneath the black flap on the front. Anyway, that's just one quirk that I noticed while working with this mini PC. So that about wraps up this review of the AyaNeo Retro PC AM01, the 3200U version at least. In general, I think this is a really nice mini PC. It's priced really well at that early bird $149, and I think that the performance you get represents that price as well. It's not going to blow you away, but it's not too bad either. And if you do choose to go with something like Linux or maybe Batacera, the performance is much better. And it becomes a really enjoyable PC for retro gaming all the way up to somewhere around PS2 and Dreamcast. And then you get some chops available for some basic GameCube, PS2 and Wii also. Of course, this is not a gaming PC, so just bear that in mind. And I think that if you're looking for a low-cost PC, perhaps a first PC for a child, or just like an aesthetic piece for your collection, I think this PC is really nice. I do think that there are a handful of missed opportunities though. For example, I think the fact that all the design elements are on the top and you lay it down is kind of a waste. I think that as a device that goes for aesthetics basically over everything else, I don't know why they wouldn't just bite the bullet and make this thing take up a little bit more room by standing up straight. Or somehow make the ports rotate and give us the option. I also have to say that I do think that the upgrade process for this PC is far more difficult than it should be. And it's definitely not as easy as other mini PCs I've used in the past. But hey, as it stands, or as it lays down I suppose, The AM01 is a pretty great mini PC. I'm really glad to see mini PCs beginning to look a little bit better, because, you know, they're usually just metal cubes, and this is at least something different. And it definitely fits the retro aesthetic, and if you're really going for looks, I don't think you can beat this one. I really hope that AyaNeo continue to innovate and try new things in the mini PC space, but while they do, I really hope that they consider the ease of use of the device as well as its aesthetics in future. If you're interested in the AM01 for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description box below for you to check out. It'll go to their Indiegogo page. However, bear in mind that these PCs are already shipping from that campaign page, so you're not going to be waiting months for a manufacturer, and there's not going to be any major changes to these before they ship out. And now it's your turn. Let me know what you think of the AM01 in the comment box below. Do you like how it looks? Are you planning to pick one up, or did you already? And what do you think about the price to performance on offer here? I personally think that what you get for that early bird $150 price is actually pretty great, but definitely let me know what you think in the comment box below. If you'd like to see how I set up a minimal Arch Linux operating system for gaming, check out my AMR5 review where I go into a bit of detail about that. I definitely recommend checking that out if you want an operating system that isn't a virus by default and has way better performance in general use. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to AyaNeo for sending me the AM01 to review, and as always, they haven't seen this video before it's gone live, nor did they have any influence over its content. And that's this one done. Thank you very much for watching Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.